Twice Enemy opening trailer. I don't really know what to make of this other than it's a fairly long video that is going to be introducing this album, and we have a cassette index, which I already said it was giving me like 70s retro. So that's interesting. Like the doilies? Interesting. Anyway, I'm assuming this is going to be opening what the whole album is going to be about. And I've been warned that I might cry, but that's pretty much it. That's all I got. Ooh, okay, interesting to have the like radio voice and almost this crowd swelling, right? Talking about like the success of the last one. But just like the hallway is giving me like, with the shadows, is giving me like a little bit of eerie vibes. Just feel like the members like walking outside the doorway, maybe?
私たちはいつも切実だった。
The like gray tones as well.
どうしても手の届かない。完璧に触れたくて。それに執着しながら。華やかな姿の裏で積もっていく不安を見えないように覆い隠したもの。
Whoa, okay. Sorry. Few things. When we got the gray tones, which makes me think it's something that's a little bit more, like, less celebratory, right? Like, we have the setup of people, like, talking about what a big success they were, but then having the grayer tones feels like it wasn't necessarily that. Also, given what's being talked about, okay, we were always chasing perfection, and it became something that was, like, consuming us, right? And like hiding away the imperfections, even this like this precarious tower of all of these things, right? Even like packing something away, right? Like, trying to hide something, so pack it away, put it somewhere where other people can't see it, but you're still carrying it with you, right? Like it's still baggage. Not to be like too on the nose, like this idea of trying to put all of this kind of precariously held together things, right, and push it down, and it's so much now that it's become this like winding tower that's like very barely standing up, and you can't pack it away anymore. Like that it's all with these kind of household objects too, like it's nothing crazy or out of the mundane, because it's like all these little things that just built up over time by you going about your normal average life, and they're not saying that this is something extraordinary for their experience. It is something that lots of people have experienced, where like things just build up and you don't fully realize it until you're in this kind of place where you can see everything's about to crash down. So I think that's a really interesting way. And we have blue tones as well in this, right? Not just like the gray over top, but we have the blues in the like the curtains and the different like the kettle and the lamp and stuff. So you have blue coming through that is usually associated with like sadness, depression, all that. So. Yeah, the anxiety that it'll topple over, and some we'll see. Interesting sound cues too. I was like, we had the phone, and then we had this kind of like eerie sound.
なぜかすごく気になってしまう。もしかしたら全部大丈夫かもしれないのに。どうして私たちは小さな物事を大きく感じてしまうのだろう。
Yeah, the music cues freak me out too.
流してしまいたかった。消せないものまで全部。
Ooh. Okay, I love the transition, like having a phone call, right, that you're like not answering. It's almost like this warning, right? Like some, like a call for help, but it could also be, it's like a ringing noise, right? It's this, again, like the sound design of this is really interesting. And I feel like having this like unanswered call is really interesting with this particular visual of doing the dishes, right? We talked about like something that was like unblemished. There was some line they talked about, yeah, like just the tiniest blemish, right? And then we have this image of washing dishes, and there's all this stuff like piled up around, right? There's clutter, but it's still trying to wash everything clean and putting everything back in these like specific places, right? Even things that like is like the cherry and stuff that doesn't necessarily feel like it all belongs there, but everyone things tucked away in a place. Again, this idea of packing something away, hiding something. If I just keep everything clean and orderly, no one will notice what's going on. I also think it's interesting that we have like blue sisters. Again, the blue motif coming through. Sisters twice, a group of women being together. I think we have a hair clip too, and we also had the hair clip with Nyan, which I think is interesting, like this idea of being held together, right? Neater, more in control, and then taking out the hair clip and that's escaping through. But I think that's interesting to have the same image pulled over. I think we have like paint too, right? Like again, these like things that don't feel like they all belong together in the same place, but you're just trying to put things away and hope that nobody like notices that there's disorder there. And then of course the cutting her finger, that even while she's trying to like clean everything and keep everything under control, right, orderly, that it's like causing damage to her, right? Like she can't get rid of the sharp edges to the things that she's trying to hide away, which is really interesting. And everything runs down the drain. Oh, if I just like clean this cut, if I just clean it, cover it up, no one will know that there are these things that are causing like physical damage to me, right?
だから流してしまいたかった。
Yeah, let it go, cover it up,
消せないものまで
no one will know.
全部心の中でなくしてしまったものを探して。
Interesting with the telephone booth, we had the phone before. Blue vehicle.
暗闇の中をさまよっていた。手を伸ばしても届かないし、自分がどこへ向かっていたのかさえもわからなくなってしまうこともある。
Ooh, interesting to say we forgot where we were trying to go and she's in a car. Again, we have the phone booth. It's a nice way of carrying over that like phone call thing. Again, we have all this clutter, all these things that are coming with her, right? And she's like searching through them, trying to figure out, find something, whether that's like a map or a way of getting to where she's supposed to be going, or if it's to fix something, it could be like anything that she's looking for, anything that might be helpful in finding that direction again. And she can't because there's just so much stuff now that it's like she can't figure out what she's looking for. And I think it's interesting that like the trunk is empty, right? She has all the stuff like cluttered in the seats, but there's nothing like packed away where you would normally like put luggage and stuff. So it's like she can't cover it up anymore, right? Like a lot of what they're talking about is hiding things away, erasing things, packing things up so that no one can see what's going on. And then you have a place where she could be putting all this stuff that no one can see, and yet she can't. Even like the convertible, right? Like it's even a car that doesn't have a roof to cover up what she's going through. I just wanted to see, I can't remember if it was before or after this. We had the book, Don't Believe Everything You Think. Interesting. Hair clip again. Even like the camera, a way of like capturing memories, but it's all cluttered together. Journal, I also think is interesting. There's a lot going on visually. I'm probably not going to get all the references. There are probably also references to other things. But yeah, this idea of losing where you're supposed to be going, right? She's in a car, she's in a vehicle that she can use to move to a new place, but she's still carrying stuff with her and she doesn't know where she's going, so she's stagnant, right?
しまうこともある。時には終わってから気づく痛みがある。
Mm-hmm. Really interesting sound design.
こういうものは誰にも見せない方がマシだったりする。
Oof, interesting. Again, sound design and this idea of everything coming, rushing in. We had the like applause, which I also think is interesting. We had the introduction with talking about the accomplishments, right? Through this like radio sound, broadcasting sound, and like the piano there, right? Like performance. And then that in contrast to this sound kind of like leaking in. Interesting to have the like pain doesn't come until it's over, right? Like the applause after the performance. And then when she walks off, some of the facade or some of the ability to put on that kind of performance is gone now. And she's like taking off the shoes and there's like blisters or cuts or whatever from being in the shoes, performing in them. Again, like this idea of performing in the mask or performing in the facade and the character that you need to be when you're on stage as a performer. I also think it's interesting that we have red with the two instances of like injury, right? The Mina with her cutting her finger and then Sana here with blisters or whatever on her feet. Contrast the reds to the blues. And I think it's also really interesting that even in this, she has a spotlight on her, right? Because we have the light from the door, everything else in this environment. It looks really nice, right? Like it's aesthetically a really nice shot, and it casts a shadow, right? So she herself has a very stark shadow that she's casting, which I think a lot of time when we're talking about someone struggling with something internally, talking about like shadows following you around or Jungian psychology with like shadow self stuff as well, also coming into it. But also she's still in a spotlight here, right? Like she feels like she can't get away from the performance, even though the performance is over. And even though she has her back turned to that spotlight, she's still aware that she's still trying to live up to that expectation, right? Of needing to hide the things that are going on with her in order to continue the performance. Really fascinating. Even like all the white that she's wearing in contrast to what she's feeling. Also, we have the butterfly earring, which I think is interesting. We didn't have any earrings on Dahyun, which I noticed. Butterfly, like flight, transformation.
誰にも見せない方がマシだったりする。ちゃんと隠しておきたかった。あれもこれも。でも気づけば溢れてきてこぼれ落ちて隠していたものまでもがいつの間にか確かに現れる。
Phone call again. Yeah, interesting. Like phone calls, I said cry for help, like a ringing. We've had ringing in terms of like white noise, right? Like a piercing sound. So that can be part of it as well as like this internal pain, right? As opposed to a physical injury. Maybe I'm just talking as like someone with like sensory issues that like the idea of a phone call and ringing sounds just gets to me. But also like it's a line of communication, right? It is either someone trying to communicate with you or you trying to communicate with them, right? We have here outgoing call as opposed to an in call, or then like trying to communicate with each other. We haven't seen any instances of them overlapping like physically with each other's storylines. They're all in isolation. So it could also be like them trying to reach out to each other, but because they're all going through their own thing, it feels like they can't have that crossover point, even though they should. And we had the sisters mentioned before. So I think it's interesting to have collective word like that I'm associating with like Twice as a whole, but they're all in this individual story. And I also think it's really interesting that we have trying to, again, put things away and it's not working. It's all spilling out. It talks about them in what they're talking, the narration as well. Of, hey, we were trying to bury all of this and it was just spilling out. Like undeniably, there was nothing we could do about it. And there was no way of holding it back anymore. But I also think that's interesting. We have apples. So again, like a point of red within all of the blue that's happening. I think that the contrast of that's really nice, but also apples a lot of the time associated with Garden of Eden imagery, right? Like the apple of knowledge, first sin, right? Temptation. So it's like this idea of feeling like, I don't know, almost like less pure or tainted or whatever. Like I feel like that's going with what they're talking about as opposed to like sin necessarily, but this idea of like corruption and giving into it, right? Like she takes a bite out of one. So it's almost this like giving into this idea that you're not perfect. And we had the white that Sana was wearing before this. And I think that's interesting to have the white, she's also wearing white, right? To then have this image of corruption in some ways, right? Like this imperfection that's being introduced. And I think especially for them as idols, I think that's a really interesting image of like people who are supposed to be almost like flawless, right? And they're talking about trying to present as if they don't have any of those flaws or they don't have any of those like shortcomings, right? And in reality, they're just humans, right? They're just as fallible as the rest of us, right? Like they're just as likely to make mistakes and to not always have the best decisions, or there's some mental health things coming through, or to always always manage things perfectly, right? There are going to be times where they're just having like a bad day, or there are other things going on in their life that doesn't have anything to do with performance or the pressures of it or whatever, right? There are going to be times in which they cannot meet that perfect image. I think probably the majority of the time they cannot meet that perfect image. So there's a lot of pressure that comes with that. And I think that's really interesting that to have, again, like that, the Apple imagery of kind of like giving into it a little bit, because it's like inevitable, right? Her talking about like this idea of everything spilling over inevitably, like undeniably, right? So it's the idea of there's nothing I can do about it. The facade is going to break. The facade is going to tumble apart. And I might as well just like, at a certain point, you need to just give into it in order for you to manage. Because I think it's also important to talk about apples are also like good for you, right? Like we could talk about like the metaphorical image of Garden of Eden, but it's also like sustenance. It's also a thing that is going to help support you, which I think is also a strong image when we're talking about something like mental health, to be like, sometimes you need to just do the thing that like feels like you're like admitting to the fact that you're struggling with something, admitting that you need help, admitting that you can't manage it all by yourself, feels like you're kind of admitting defeat, right? Like it feels like you're admitting that there's something like broken or wrong with you, right? But at the end of the day, usually the best thing for you, right? Because as someone who also has like anxiety and all that, right? Being able to get support from people, telling people when stuff has been going on with me is one of the best ways to actually support myself and to get the help and nurturing that I need. And I think that is also an interesting image to bring into this as well. I'm just kind of throwing everything at the wall. I have no idea, but really interesting video so far. I'm like invested. Also, she's cute. I know that's not the point of it, but
かけたかった言葉もかけられなかった言葉もいつからかずっと静かに心の奥にしまっていた。
Ooh, interesting with that too. Making the phone call and being like the things that we wanted to say, the things that we shouldn't have, right? Both wanting to perhaps reach out for help or communicate. Like I was talking before, like sometimes the best thing that you can do when you're struggling with something is talk to someone and admit that you need help and that you need support. And there's also lots of times when we say things in general in which we look back and we go, ooh, I shouldn't have said that. Especially when we're in places of struggling, it can be from this place of lashing out at people around us who don't know what's going on. And we're lashing out with our words because there's something else going on and we don't have the bandwidth to deal with anything that's going to put any more pressure on us, regardless of how small it might be. Someone might ask you like a simple question and just the need to like make a decision or feel like you have to decide something that is going to have an impact on other people is like too much. You're just like, I can't, regardless of how big or small it might be. And especially for, again, like them being idols, them being people in the public eye, I'm sure that there like are so many things that they've said that have been scrutinized and pulled apart and looked at from every direction. And that can have a lot of pressure with it, especially if you're like struggling with something. How do you talk about the fact that you're struggling with something when people are going to be analyzing it with a magnifying glass from every possible angle, whether or not people are being supportive or negative? That's still like a lot of pressure to put on yourself when you're going through something. And I've talked about it before, even from a place of being fans and wanting to be supportive, it's still intimidating to have everything that you're talking about analyzed, right? Regardless of what the intention might be, it can still be a lot of pressure to like have that be something public, especially for some having Junghyun of all of the people who's delivering that part of the monologue, right? Someone who had to take a break and had to step away for a little bit. I'm sure that regardless of how supportive people might have been, there was still going to be like a lot of speculation around that decision, regardless of how much people wanted to support her in it or whatever. And I'm sure that's like intimidating, right? Not even including the fact that a lot of people are going to have like a bunch of negative, not nice things to say about that. So I think that's really interesting. And the call going unanswered, right? Of even though I want to make amends, I can only do that if someone else is willing to like meet me halfway and to answer that call, make that connection. And we have the like unanswered calls with the other members too, which I think is interesting, of just like a crossover point. Like I was saying, we haven't had any point in which they physically crossed over with each other's like little references to connect the like overarching story of this video, but there isn't anything to connect them all together. So it's like, even if Junghyun within this is, oh, I would like to reach out and help, know that she's a very like caring person to her members within this group. Even if she wants to help, she's like, I can't do that unless you're willing to meet me, and you can't help me unless I reach out. So it's very interesting to have a phone call is something that has to be answered on both ends, right? Like it has to be a connection from both people, and you can't just force someone to be on a phone call with you.
静かに心の奥にしまっていた
Interesting that we do have a lot of like we being used, right? Of this like, again, collective word, but they're all individual.
この扉の向こうに休める場所があるって知ってたけどなぜかここにもう少しいたくなった
Interesting with that too. Oh, I thought it was interesting she opened the door and it's like a spotlight again, but she steps away from it. So I was like, I think that's already interesting to be stepping away from a spotlight when we're talking about performers. But then also talking about beyond this door is a place where we could rest, right? Like we could walk away from this. Like we could take a moment to ourselves. And yet we don't want to do that. I think that's such an interesting thing too, as like a performer, as someone who like legitimately enjoys being performers, being musicians. It's so difficult for you to accept that like the thing that you love and that is your outlet and that you have a lot of like passion and love for is also something that is causing harm. If we're talking about just like going through like the pressures of being an idol, like I don't think for a second that like any of them would have been idols for as long as they have been if it wasn't something they legitimately found joy in, right? Like there are moments in which they could have walked away from this and they didn't, because it is something that they legitimately find joy in and that they love. And you can see that, and especially for some of the members where you see them perform and you can just tell that they come alive, right? Like Dio loves being on stage. I don't think anyone could look at Dio and not think that she loves being on stage. And I think that Sui is such a hard worker as a performer too. There are so many points where I've seen like the growth of her that if she didn't love it, she wouldn't have put in that much effort to become the performer that she has. But you also have to accept that there are parts of it that are also going to cause that negativity, right? Like you talk about like Rest, even they've done a lot of stuff. They've done a lot of stuff this year, let alone like in their whole career. They've put a lot of work in to being Twice, and I'm sure that there are moments in which they did just want to rest. They felt like they couldn't keep going at the same pace, but like wanting to linger, wanting to stay with this thing that you love so much. And even if it is also something that's going on with them, they're talking about that isn't about being a performer, it's still difficult to accept that like you have to give up something you love and you have passion for in order to take care of something else that is going on in your life, walking away from a thing that can bring you that joy because you have other stuff that is like taking that from you, right? Or even like making it so you can't enjoy that thing as much as you used to, but you're lingering because you're hoping that it'll have that effect again. Really fascinating. And then the water like darkening everything.
決められたゴールなんて本当にあるのかな
Also interesting. I noticed we had the stairs in a couple of the background.
今どこにいるんだろうそれともただ歩き続けなきゃいけないだけなのかな
Ooh. That's interesting too. I noticed that we had the stairs in the background with the scene with Sui in the hallway. I also think it's interesting that we've had a few moments of being like sitting on the ground, right? And then we have the stairs like climbing, but switching directions and wandering around, like this idea of like, where's the end point? Where are we trying to go? Earlier, they talk about not knowing where they were going anymore with Dahyun, where she was talking about like, we didn't even know where we were going. We didn't even realize how we didn't have that direction anymore. And also talking about like, almost this like perpetual struggle forward. And I think that is interesting for anyone who feels stuck, right? Feels like they're going through something and that they're just getting from one point to the next, right? If someone who is going through a lot of stuff and trying to like keep it all together, that you might just be focusing on like the next step, and it doesn't necessarily mean that you know where like you're ultimately going at the end of it. But I also think it's interesting for them as performers of, do we just keep doing the same things? Do we just keep going through the same cycle of like comeback, promotion, tour, comeback, promotion, tour, right? Do we keep doing the same thing over and over again forever? Or is there something else that we need to be doing? And again, I think that's really interesting for talking about like a break. Is it a break to come back and do the same thing? Is it a moment of rest within the same place that you are currently in, or is it a walking out of it? And I think it's interesting also that we've had a lot of inside for them, but we also had, again, Junghyun, who did take a break, who was like outside, and you can see some nature in it. I know that Dahyun was also outside with a car, but it was very like industrial and like concrete and all of that around her. Whereas like, Junghyun is the one person who was like outside, you can see like trees and stuff. And also she was the one making a phone call. She wasn't the one like receiving a phone call. And I think it's also really interesting as the one person who was actually taking a break for a significant amount of time. She's like the one person who seems to have like a active role of making the phone call that is going unanswered. And also we have these points of like nature, trees and stuff in the background for her, and she's outside, there's like a breeze and stuff, right? Head turned towards the sky. There's a little bit less of this suffocating feeling of being inside in these like hallways, right? Narrow places in a lot of this. Even like with Sana with that spotlight, it was narrowing that environment into this like one kind of path of light. So I think that's also really interesting.
Watashi tachi wa donna kaoをしていたんだろう。これからどんな顔をしていくべきなんだろう。
Okay, one, acting there. Beautiful. Because having a shot that is close up on your face and you're trying to go through that many complex emotions, shout out to Jill for that. I was already thinking, because we have the mirror, right? The glass that is like all the condensation on it. I'm like, I already think that's interesting to have the like water like dripping down and trying to clear up the fog, right? But in doing so, you're creating the water like dripping down, and like her response to seeing her reflection is to smile, right? And talking about like, which faces should we have, and then you see some of the struggle, and then she's back to all of this. So many complex things there, like the shuddering breath, the like tension that we're getting around like the throat and the jawline for that, and then of course like the tears like finally falling. You can see like the tears building up in her eyes and then finally falling, and she like tilts her head down as a way of hiding that, right? So many complex little nuances in that performance that I definitely want to watch it again. Just like beautifully done from her. You can see some of it like the tension in the eyebrows as well. Even the like fluttering of her eyes, like holding back the emotion and trying to keep the smile on. Keep the mask. Right, she tilts her head down for the tears, and then when she raises her head again, they're gone. Interesting to hear the running. Ooh, I think it's so interesting to hear the like running. I think it's the implication that it's Jill, right? Because we don't see her and like, everyone looking around. So having the leader be the one who's, I don't know, maybe running for the door that we talked about of like where I can finally rest, or running to find them. They're all in isolation, needing that support or to support them, or like this idea of running away from what's happening or needing to do something different instead of being trapped in the bathroom that she was in, like in this enclosed space. And very interesting. I was thinking too, it was like enemy was something that I was like, I don't really know what enemy is going to mean exactly within this context, but I think given this video, it feels like it's the internal struggle. Like I was talking before, like we get into like Jungian psychology of shadow self and all of that, right? Talking about the internal struggle, the internal enemy, or doing things that you know are bad for you, but also the enemy is you. And like I am, and then we have enemy for the title, right? Like the idea that your biggest enemy is yourself, because you know that you're doing things that are perhaps like destructive or not necessarily good for you, or are keeping you trapped in the state that you're in, but also there's some complexities to that. Like, why are you doing that? And why are you running away from it? Why are you trying to cover it up? Why are you trying to put on like the right face for whatever's going on? That is like strength, but in reality, it's causing damage. And like I was even saying of like, how do you give up something that you love in order to deal with something that you're struggling with? You can feel this like antagonistic force within you of wanting to keep the things that you love and bring you joy, but also recognizing that in doing so, you are not giving yourself the space to figure yourself out and get the support that you need and to get the rest that you need. Really fascinating and brilliantly done from all of them. Like, wonderful performances, acting from all of them, the narration, right? The visuals of it, which I think from like the credits, Joe was also part of that. Yeah, like the narration and the visual direction. So shout out to her for that as well, and putting in that much work for the story that was going on. I think it was really well done in terms of like the lighting, the different settings, the way that we cut between different parts of the members and the crossovers for that, and the use of like color and costume and everything. Really well put together. It makes me very interested what this comeback is going to be as a whole, if this is what they're digging into of that internal struggle and how do we deal with the fact that we can't bury it all anymore. Fascinating. Definitely let me know your thoughts down in the comments, because I'm sure there are things that I missed that I don't get the references to, but I'm very interested in this. I don't think that I've gotten to anything from Twice yet that leans this much into kind of those darker sides or internal struggles as much as this seems to be. At least I'll find out once I get to the actual album once it comes out.